Good morning.
Good morning.
So we go from the US to the opposite and now move to Russia. And I've added Ukraine, but what we have to understand is the painters we're going to see today, even if they were Ukrainian, were considered as Russian because it was part of the Russian Empire at that time. So as usual, I'm showing you a little historical summary, very, very summarized. So looking at serfdom, that was mostly in central and southern Russia, and by the way, too, in Poland, during the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, serfdom existed in Poland too. So it lasted from the 11th century to 1861, when finally serfdom was abolished. Nicholas I reigned between 1825 and 55, and he annexed Dagestan, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. In the 1840s, there were two different trends in Russia. Some were looking at the West and looking at Europe and wanted to be more Europeanized. But then you had a much more Slavophile trend that looked at Europe as being I had the term earlier, they were going down the drain, they were excessive in many ways, and they wanted to keep their roots and be more and more aware of their own origin instead of looking at a very progressive Europe at the time. When we talk about 1840s, the Industrial Revolution was going full steam in Europe at that time. And that is something that Russia is going to follow too. Between 1853 and 56, we have the Crimean War that in fact is due to what seems to be a futile reason. It was just a question of protecting the Christians in the Holy Land. And Holy Land was in the hand of the Ottomans at the time. The Russian wanted the Russian Orthodox to be protected, but not the Catholics. And so France and other countries then gathered to France, Britain, and actually the Ottoman Empire and Sardinia allied themselves against Russia, and Russia lost. Between 1855 and 81, Alexander II during his reign happened the emancipation of serfs, the sale of Alaska to the US, and assassination he was assassinated in 81. This really was the result of a growing anarchism in Russia and actually in the east of Europe. Some of the main figures, or the main figure, was Michael Bakunin, that had started quite earlier than 1872, but he met with Karl Marx in 72, and they were in very deep disagreement over socialism. Between 1881 and 94, we have Alexander III, in 1894 and 17, Nicholas II, who is the last Tsar, that was, of course, killed with his whole family in 17. And then finally, in 1922, you have the treaty on the creation of the USSR and what is known as the Soviet Republic. Here's an idea of the immensity of the country when you look at this. Of course, not the present time, but at that time, it was an enormous, enormous territory. And when you talk about enormous territory, it means also a problem on how to govern it, because the distances are so huge, it's very difficult. With what was at the time limited ways of communication, it would still be very difficult to govern nowadays with what we have, but it's absolutely enormous. Now, we're going to talk a lot about the Peredvishniki, or wanderers, And I wanted to give you an idea. That was a realist movement that was formed in the 60s by a group of 14 students who left the constraining Imperial Academy of Art in St. Petersburg. There were two main academies in Russia at the time. You had the one in Moscow and the one in St. Petersburg. But the one in St. Petersburg was most famous, really brought the biggest names at the time. And they, as most academies of the time, they were pretty rigid. The studies were of quality as far as technique was concerned, but as far as inspiration was concerned, it was too strict and limiting the subjects that people could do to be successful. So they formed at first the Petersburg Cooperative of Artists, Artel. But then in 1870 was succeeded by the Association of Traveling Art Exhibits, the and I tried to repeat it, it's difficult, Peredvishniki, in an effort to bring art to the people. And that really was the idea, that instead of having art centered in St. Petersburg and Moscow, they would take a whole series of paintings and sculptures, but mostly paintings around the country, so that people in other cities could be able to see it, and also give a chance to a lot of these painters that would go with the exhibition to see other places and get other inspiration. Between 1871 and 1923, the Society arranged 48 mobile exhibitions in St. Petersburg and Moscow, then shown in Kiev, Kharkov, Kazan, Oryol, Riga, Odessa, and other cities. And here's a picture of some of the male members of that society with great faces. We have in there that you might recognize Vasily Surikov, Makovsky, Shishkin is in there, Kramskoy, Repin, Ilya Repin is there, and others that are lesser known. Now, it's only now that, not too long ago, that Russian painting has been recognized in the West. And so very difficult to get good documentation on it. They're not really good monograph on any of these painters that could be relied on. So it was difficult. It's getting better. And fortunately, I'm able to get much better photographs of their works. So here are some of the main names, and I put them in timeline, so you have down below the Czars. And then in blue are two French painters, one who is a realist and one who is an impressionist. And it gives you an idea where these main names are located. So Shishkin is a great landscapist. Pehov is doing landscape and portrait. Kramskoy is mostly portrait. Verhashagin, that we'll see at the end, is not part of the Peredvishniki, but he will exhibit sometimes with them. And then Ilya Repin, who is probably the biggest name of the whole group, who was a main teacher at the St. Petersburg Academy. For those of you that know Nikolai Fechin studied with Ilya Repin, but he was never there. So he would typically study with some of his other students. And of course, you can see how, in fact, Monet, the Impressionist, is pretty contemporary with one of the biggest realist painters there. So let's look at some of these. And some of them, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name. But let's say Alexei Savrazov, so avoiding the middle name, was born in Moscow in 1830, graduated from the Moscow School of Painting, Sculpture, and Architecture, and specialized in landscape painting. He became a teacher at the MSPCA, so Moscow Academy, and married Sofia Karlovna Hertz, and I put the name because Hertz is still the descendant of them, is a very known art historian in Germany who published a whole series of monographs on small Flemish painters of the 17th century. He entertained artistic people and collectors, including the famous Pavel Tretiakov, who is the collector whose name is now on the biggest museum in Moscow. He traveled in England in the 1860s and exhibited there, but after losing his daughter in the 1870s became gradually alcoholic, and everybody, all his friends tried to get him out of it and never succeeded. So unfortunately, in 1897, he died in poverty in Moscow. So here is one of, I think, very delightful landscape. The rooks have come back, and I put next to it is a rook, so you have an idea on how it looks. It's a bird that exists in Britain, but also in Russia and the Eastern Europe. Rather large black bird, as you can see, but with these white, the white feather around the beak. It was painted near the Ipatiev monastery in Kostroma. So this is considered as really the high point of his career. Really a simple episode of having these birds, you know, coming back. But you have that beautiful transition of nature from winter to spring. The bird is part of the Corvidae, if you're interested in. But very sensitive landscape, beautiful use of light, and very nice composition. Another of his paintings is called Rasputitsa, the Sea of Mud, which is literally the melting of snow in the spring. But I love the way he really uses that white on white and the variation of colors turning to purple, as we know can happen. Another great landscapist is Ivan Ivanovich Shishkin. He was born in Yelabuga, which is in the Tatarstan nowadays, attended the St. Petersburg Imperial Academy of Arts, became professor there, and then lived and worked in Switzerland and Germany on a scholarship. Sorry. He became a member of the itinerant, who is the same as the Perednif. Oh, okay, I'll quit. But also of the Society of Russian Watercolorists, and died in '98 in St. Petersburg.
And who painted him? That's fabulous.
That's painted by Kamskoy. Yeah. He has a fabulous, these painters have faces that are absolutely superb. So here are some of the landscapes, a view on the outskirts of St. Petersburg. You can look at that, you could think it's almost a constable, you know, in the way he treats the nature. This one is really pretty with the little pool of water and the forest, that kind of haze at the horizon. He was apparently really analyzing nature, and he's very famous for his forest landscapes. This is forest distance. You would believe it's a picture. It's almost incredible to believe it's a painting. And then a really frolicking bears. The morning in the pine forest is one of his most famous ones.
They have a coin of that.
You do?
Yes.
And it's absolutely beautiful because you know that he's been observing it. But again, he's such a realist that you would believe it's a photograph. and then in the wild north, so going very north, and you can feel the weight of that snow on the tree there. He actually owned a dacha south of St. Petersburg, and so most of his finest landscape were made while he was living there. Another of the great names is Vasily Perov, who was born in Tobolsk as an illegitimate son of the local procurator baron. In 1853, was admitted to the Moscow School of Painting. And it's really interesting. I'm going to let the Native American go by. He was really from a very poor family. And these kids, very often, what they did when they didn't have a chance to nobly go to the academy, were remarked by people, and they started painting icons. And it's in small towns, what they did is reproduce icons, and that's how they started. And then because their work was so good, then they were noticed and sent to St. Petersburg or Moscow. In 1862, he went to Western Europe, visited several German cities, and then in Paris. 71, he taught at the Moscow School of Art and joined the Peredvishniki. He died in the village of Kuzminki, which is now part of Moscow, from tuberculosis. Unfortunately, a lot of people, as you know, were. He's more attracted to the life of peasants, of poor peasants. And so this is going to be most of the subject. So here you have actually a ragman in Paris. So that's during his time in Paris. He's attracted by a very interesting face. And then you have the woman who is catty corner with him. A lovely image of sleeping children. And unfortunately, I can't find any information on what these paintings, any details. And I don't know that it must be extremely difficult for any scholar to try to find this information after the revolution and all the trouble that they went through. But beautiful rendering of that light striking the young boy sleeping on that blanket. A little more entertaining is this, the hunters addressed, and you can imagine what they're talking about. When you see the guy that is facing them too, he shows a big monster, so you can believe it's probably a bear that he's talking about, and then the other one in front of him believes him, and the other one knows it's a joke. So you have a lot happening between the three figures. He's also, Perov is also a great portraitist, and here's a portrait of Dostoevsky. Extremely deep representation of that extraordinary author. Among the biggest portraitists is Ivan Kramskoy, probably one of the most known, born in Ostrogotsk in Sloboda, Ukraine. Studied at St. Petersburg Academy of Art between 1857 and 63, very much influenced, as most of them are by the time, by the ideas of the Russian revolutionary Democrats. And we're talking about revolution that happened before the big one. They were uprisings from peasants, as well as some intellectual who were really fed up with the lack of democracy, let's put it. Initiator of the revolt of 14, so which is the Peredvishniki. And he died in 1887 in St. Petersburg from an aortic aneurysm while working at his age only 49. And he is the author of the painting of Shishkin before. This is another portrait of Shishkin, but in the hunting. They're absolutely extraordinary painter. This is the most known portrait of Pavel Tretyakov, the great collector. And I'm going to stop a little bit and talk about Tretyakov because he has such a role in having collected and supported all of these painters. He was born in 1832 and started collecting art at the age of 22. His first purchase was 10 canvases by old Dutch masters. But then he decided he wanted to create a Russian gallery of art. So the core of his collection were the Peredvishniki. He bought paintings at exhibition and directly from the studios. And sometimes he would buy a whole series of paintings. So some of these painters would be in a particular location and do a whole series, and he would buy the whole series of paintings. In 1974, he acquired Vereshchagin Turkestan series that was made of 13 pictures, 133 figures, and 81 studies. And in 1880, his Indian series that was also, and we'll see Vereshchagin at the end of the presentation. But he had a vast collection of Perov, Kramskoy, Repin, Surikov, Levitan, and Serov. He also acquired pictures by masters of the 18th century and first half of the 19th century, and then landmarks of older Russian painting. So to really complete, to make it a more comprehensive painting. And his aim became also to create a Russian pantheon. And so he commissioned some of the painters like Kramskoy and other portraitists to create a portrait gallery of famous Russians. And they're also part of the collection of the Tretyakov. In August 1892, Tretyakov donated his entire collection and one of his private residences, the one in Moscow, to the city of Moscow. And at that time, the collection was of 1,287 pictures and 518 graphics of the Russian school. He was also quite a charitable person, and he really, for example, he gave one of his other houses to make it a school and gave money for the kids to be educated very highly, so that they could succeed in life. So a very extraordinary figure. Here is the facade of the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow, with a statue of him in front. And at the time, we hoped to have part of the collection coming to Phoenix. It was a dream at the time, yes. Tom Lohman tried to bring it, and he went to Russia and discussed with them, and then it fell through the cracks and unfortunately never worked. More of the portrait, and that's part of that pantheon that, as you can see, is at the Tretyakov. This is Leo Tolstoy, a fabulous portrait of his. It's really, you can scrutinize that mind when looking at him. And Tolstoy was known to be not an easy man to be around. He had very, very strict ideas on how to live, and it was, leave me alone, very much. One of my very favorite is this painting of Mina Moiseev, who was just a peasant. But I think it's one of, he has two paintings of him, one standing, but I love this one that's very close because the guy seems to have such a good sense of humor. He has that beautiful face. It's for somebody who was obviously living a hard life. It's somebody that is optimistic. You can see it on his face. A lesser known name is Arkhip Ivanovich Quingy. A superb face too. This is a self-portrait. He was of Greek descent. Born in 1841, very close to Mariupol, that has been much in the news, and the coast of Ukraine. His Christian name is a Russian rendering of the Greek archipos. That means the master of horses. In 1855, he visited Feodosia in Crimea to study art under Ivan Ivazovsky. And he's another painter that I showed you at length, who is a superb, what we consider romantic landscapist, absolutely incredible, and who was the big name in Crimea. Unfortunately for him, Ivazovsky, who traveled all over the world, wasn't very much there, but he worked with one of the students of Ivazovsky. He then studied at the St. Petersburg Academy of Art, became a full member of the Academy, became also a co-partner of the traveling art exhibition, but in '97 was fired from the Academy because he supported the student protests. And he died in 1910 in St. Petersburg. He is from what used to be what they call the Ponte Greek. So it's part of the former colonies of Greece along the Black Sea. I'm only showing you two of his paintings, but I think they are extraordinary. Here is the Lake Ladoga. Look at that transparency of the water that increases. It's absolutely stunning. And very different painting showing the red summer at the Dnieper. You could believe it's Arizona. Can somebody give a program to her? You have one there. Rosemary, yes. Thank you. Another lesser known painter is Vasily Maximov, born to a peasant family in the village of Lopino in the St. Petersburg Governorate in '44. Worked for an icon painting shop, as it was often when they were of really poor extraction, that's what they would do if they were talented. Entered the Imperial Academy of Art in '63. In '65, he refused to be, typically when they were finishing the academy, they would give them scholarship if they were very talented to travel around Europe. And he refused to go abroad, saying he didn't need that, but he'd rather would study the Russian village. He was admitted to the Perhedvishniki group in '72 and died in 1911, poor and ill. His art had become, how can I say, was not liked by the government by that time, and so he didn't get a lot of commissions. So again, as we know, he's going to show mostly students and peasants, and typically in poor conditions. So he is that very, very sad image of the sick husband. And you can just want to attract your attention on how the icons are set, always typically in the corner of a room. So the main icon would be that one, and then they would have others on the side. It's a kind of a sacred location for them. But again, absolutely beautiful painting, but it is stressing the extreme poverty that existed in Russia at that time. Now, yeah.
Would that be a painting of the couple kind of sitting in the middle off to the right? It almost looks like it might be them. Looks religious.
Yeah, I doubt that they had ever paintings made of them. That would be, these are typically icons. Yeah. Now, probably the biggest name of all the ones internationally is Ilya Repin. Quite a figure. Born in the town of Chuguyev in the Kharkov governorate. So he is a Ukrainian, one of the Ukrainian. Kramskoy and him are both from Ukraine. He became a student of local icon painter attended the Imperial Academy of Art, and then they met Kramskoy. Of course, they were compatriots. He traveled to the Volga River in 70, married Vera Shevtsova, okay, I would say, and then met Pavel Tretyakov, which was, of course, the big moment because Tretyakov is going to become very friendly to all these people. And when I talked about the first painter, if you remember, that died of alcoholism, that Tretyakov was the only one to follow his funeral. Nobody else was there, but Tretyakov was there. In 74 and 76, he contributed to the Salon in Paris and to the exhibition of the Itinerant Society in St. Petersburg, and became familiar with the Impressionists, and we'll see how his style is going to vary a little bit. In 87, visited Austria, Italy, Germany, and retired from the board of the Itinerant Society. In 93, visited the Academy Art School in Warsaw, Krakow, Munich, Vienna, and Paris to observe and study teaching methods, and spent the winter in Italy and published his essays, Letters on Art. In 94 to 1907, he taught at the Higher Art School attached to the Academy of Arts, and it was a privilege to have a class with Repin. He met Natalia Nordman, who died in 1914, but he met her in 1900, lived in her home in Penati, in Kuokala. The name of the home was Penati, in Kuokala, that was Finland, that at the time was Russia and then became Finland. And he died in 1930 and was buried in the Penati, which is now Rapino.
And did he retire from the Itinerant Society because he didn't see himself alive?
Yeah, there were some, he's not the only one. There are many that kind of got tired of some of the ideas that were there or saw their future in something different. He is known for these enormous canvases that are very kind of historic painting. This is one of them. Just incredible, what is called the barge haulers on the Volga. Called burlak in Russian, where you had along the river, you had these very poor people that would drag these large ships all along. And this is, every time it's a tearjerker when you look at this. It's so incredible to see these paintings. And it was, again, he has that sense of texture. If you look at the sand on the shore, the people in rags, and then you have a young guy among all these older people that, of course, you would believe he's probably too young to be there. But it's absolutely heartbreaking. And then you have the church, the Orthodox church in the background. Here are some pictures taken of burlaks, and you can see that it was men and women. And apparently some of them had held relatively high social positions, but had been demoted, and then you couldn't go anywhere. If you were demoted, this is how you would end. Of course, this is another one, very large painting. As you can see, it's a 1.75 m by 2.80 m. It would cover about from here to the wall, to the corner there. This shows the procession in Kork's province. It's really interesting. This was completed between 1880 and 1883, and you have that mass attending the annual religious procession that carries the famous icon, Our Lady of Korks, from its home at the Kohenaya monasteries to the city of Korks. And what you see is just that mixture of people. So you have the clerics, you have the religious people that you see in the back there. And then you see some it's difficult to say bourgeois, but let's say landowners. But then you have all these handicapped people around that are pushed back by the police. And then the icon, which is kept there. And you have one woman here who's carrying another icon in her hands. When Tretiakov saw the painting, he fell in love with it right away, wanted to buy it, under the condition that Repin changes that ugly woman there for a pretty Russian peasant.
Oh my.
And Repin refused, and he bought it anyway. But it's an absolutely extraordinary painting. When you look at the different categories of people there and their attitude, the expressions, incredible. Here is an idea of, that's the monastery, the Kohenaya monastery, and there is the miraculous image, the icon. This is seen without the cover, and this is seen with the cover.
How do they display it?
Like this. Other very known painting is the famous one showing of the Cossack, the Zaporozhye Cossack, that are replying to the Sultan. This comes at the time where the Cossacks were reigning in the southern part of Ukraine. Now you have to realize Cossacks were not an ethnicity. Cossacks were people that got together by the attitude of refusing to become serfs. It's during the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Poles were trying to bring the peasants into serfdom for their landowners. And so many rebelled against that. And they congregated, particularly in the southern part of Ukraine, and were fierce. They were known to be fierce, combatant, and so on, became a force. But the Poles were attacking them constantly, and finally they asked Russia to help them going against the Poles. Guess why? What happened is that the Russian helped, but they invaded at the same time. And so it's thanks to the Cossacks that finally Russia became the ruler in Ukraine. But here it's an episode where the poor Cossacks, they had the Poles on the north, they had the Russian on the northeast, and they had the Ottomans coming from the south. That the Ottomans really wanted that part because it was a fertile country. And so the Sultan had sent them a letter for them to surrender to him. And this is what you see is them really laughing. And I'm going to read you because this is really part of history. The Sultan says, as the Sultan, son of Mohammed, brother of the sun and moon, grandson and viceroy of God, ruler of the kingdom of Macedonia, etc., etc. As you can see, I commend you, the Zaporozhian Cossack, to submit to me voluntarily and without any resistance, and to desist from troubling me with your attacks. This is signed Sultan Mehmed IV. The Ottomans really attacked. They had a lot, the Ukrainians had lots of forts all along the coast. So the Cossacks are dictating to the scribe that you see there in the middle, O Sultan, Turkish devil and damned devil Kesenkin, secretary of Lucifer himself, what the devil kind of knight are you that can't slay a hedgehog with your naked arse? The wording, sorry, is not mine. The devil excretes and your army eats. You will not, you son of a, make subject of Christian sons. We've no fear of your army. By land and by sea, we will battle with thee, F your mother. So that was, and it goes on, believe me, it's not finished. So Zaporizhzhia, if you know what's happening right now, is on the Dnieper. And it's where there is the second nuclear central. And it is actually really attacked by the Russian right now. So this is a very famous, as you can see, it is in the State Russian Museum. But the Ukrainian would love to have it back. Another really interesting and really frightening image is Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan on November 16th, when Ivan the Terrible has actually killed his own son. It is amazing because if you look at these crazy eyes of the father, and then you have that big gash on the side of the face of the son who is dying in his arms. What is interesting is that painting, he normally stayed away from historical episodes, but this one really attracted him. And he took as example, as models, two friends of his. And you can see the one is a painter, the other one is a writer. So the top one was for the Ivan the Terrible, and the other one for the son. But this is absolutely, you can have nightmares just looking at that face. As I mentioned, he met with the Impressionists and his style started changing for some things. You know, painters don't change everything. Sometimes it's for certain subject, they're gonna be more impressionistic, and for others different. And this is a self-portrait that he did of his second wife, Natalia Borisovna, and himself. And you see there something with the light that is so impressionist. You could imagine Renoir painting that. He seemed to have been very happy. He spent more time in Finland than he did in St. Petersburg when he was a teacher. So as I mentioned, Nikolai Fechin, who had received the honor of being admitted in his class, didn't see much of him, but rather studied with another one that I will show you a few images later on. And this is a very different image that you see. This is towards the end of his career, the demonstration of the 17th of October, 1905. This was the precursor to the first constitution that is going to be adopted the year after, was issued by Nicolas II. And it's interesting because it has the French colors. So you look at that and you say, is that in France? You know, you have all bleu, blanc, rouge. But a much more lighter color scheme than what he was using before. Just an incredible artist, and I had to really restrain myself to just show you these because he has so many. He had a tremendous production. Okay, I'm going to take 5 before we go on with the rest. So you can ask questions, stretch your legs. You can unmute. Sorry, this is not what I meant to do. No, there we are. On people online, you can ask me questions. You can unmute yourself and you will remute yourself after that. So any question, Mary? Mary?
I want to recommend a movie.
Yeah?
The Russian Ark. Have you seen it?
No.
It's absolutely amazing. It's shot entirely inside the museum in St. Petersburg in a single take. And it's a history of Russia.
Oh.
And
so Russian Ark. Russian Ark. So Mary is recommending the Russian Ark to be seen, which takes you through the St. Petersburg Museum.
So Anne, I have a
Yes.
question. And this movement of the 14 painters was not covered in a lecture that I heard on a Russian river cruise. And I'm wondering if that sort of has been censored by the Russian government now. Do they have a problem with the history of this 14
I think they did have some problem with it because they were showing the poverty.
Okay, okay.
But I'm not sure, I don't see why they would censor that, because there's a very, very important movement in the 19th century, mid-19th century.
This art professor, she showed us Repin and she showed us some one or two of the ones that well, the one about
Kramskoy and Zechov we'll see later on.
the Cossacks painting, which she showed us
Yeah.
that. She didn't say anything about the Peredvishnik.
That's
I would remember that
because
name.
it was so, it was such an idea, wonderful idea to take the art around and show it to other people than just Moscow and St. Petersburg.
And it certainly seems in keeping with a populist kind of
Very
ideology.
Yeah, very
So I
much.
don't know why they wouldn't, but there's all kinds of things that they suppress.
Yeah.
So, recognize, as you know, because you researched all that Ukrainian stuff that
Yeah,
history is a completely different version.
exactly. And this is why sometimes it's so difficult to make sense of it, because you have these ideas from, interpreted a certain way from one side and from the other. And as I mentioned, Repin is in fact Ukrainian, but worked mostly in the north.
Oh, and she didn't mention that he was Ukrainian. The professor.
They would not.
No, she did not tell
They
us.
would not.
They all have the crazy eyes.
Oh, yes, they do. Yeah.
It looks like the Bela Lugosi vampire
Yeah.
character from the movie.
No, but they're protesting, they're protesting. And so it's yes. Yes. Oh, probably with what's happening. Yes, they would. Yeah. Yeah. But Repin is an incredible painter. But the Hashagin that we'll see at the end is also incredible. So we'll see. We have a few more.
Do you go to the gem show? I know most of the yeah, worldwide. Yeah, I believe it because they all come there. Yeah. I love the gem show.
But this painting, if you're familiar with it, it makes me think of James Ensor. James Ensor, James Ensor, the Belgian painter. He really does the coloring and the type of. Okay, people, we're going to start again. We're going to start. Go on. Okay, we're going to start again. And let me bring that up. So the next painter we're looking at is also a smaller figure of the sometimes I can say Peredvishnik, that's it. Andrei Ryabushkin, born in the village of Stanishnaya Sloboda in 1961, entered the Moscow School of Painting and then moved to St. Petersburg. Instead of going to Italy and Paris, he chose to make a tour of ancient Russian towns. He studied the old architecture, items of folk crafts, old weapons, fabrics, tapestries, embroidery, icons, etc., and read ancient books and collected folklore. Hold on a second, I'm going to mute. Okay, sorry for that. He was also part of the Peredvishniki group between 90 and 94, but most of his paintings, I'm not going to show much of him, I just wanted you to have an idea. Most of his paintings were devoted to the 17th century, and he died of tuberculosis also in 1904. And here's the kind of paintings he does. He does all kind of these representation, often religious representation of monks and women going to the church and so on. And in this case is the session of Tsar Michael I with Boyar Duma in front of him. Just incredible colors. And all of these, his works are very highly, very colorful, very bright. Very different and kind of, you can compare him to the late period of Ilya Repin, is Valentin Zverhov. Also, as you can see now, they're born in 61. This is just 11 years before Impressionism is starting. It was born in also, no, sorry, I didn't, oh, sorry people online. Okay, here is the painting by Ryabushkin. As I say, was born in St. Petersburg, married Olga Trupnikova, had 5 children, taught in the Moscow School of Painting, and then joined the Peredvishniki group, became a member of the World of Art, an influential Russian art association, and then in 1903 became full member of St. Petersburg Academy of Art and resigned in 1905 because of its stance against, there was a revolt in 1905 to 1908, and he resented what was happening and the stance of the academy at that time, and died in Moscow from stenocardia in 1911. As you can see, his paintings are much closer to Impressionism. This is just a wonderful girl with peaches that is often looked at as the early Nikolai Fechin portraits of his own daughter. They are often put side by side. Just a wonderful representation with the light reflecting on her, the very dark eyes, beautiful complexion, and then the pink shirt with the bow, and then the little still life just in front on the table. What is interesting is that at that time, Zverhov, this was painted in 87, he didn't know the Impressionist. And you look at it, you have that feeling there is that general trend that you have now towards a more sensitive lighter color scheme and so on. Because you think of Sorolla in Spain, we'll see some other painting that is very Sorollesque, not by him, but by another. This is another of his painting, The Girl Covered by the Sun.
What a great title.
Yeah. So he loved intimate, heartfelt chamber portraits, many of children and women, though he also did some official portraits. He did all the big names of his time. And this is one of them. We're talking about the composer Rimsky-Korsakov. Very interesting portrait of the great composer. And then towards the end of his life, he's kind of leaves that impressionistic style that he has to have a more modernist approach. And this is the portrait of Maxim Gorky in 1905. And you can see there a very modernist way of handling the paint with long brush strokes and that mixture of color in the background. You have the feeling he's going to get up. There is a lot of energy in that portrait. And then a very Sorollesque painting, when you look at that, to me, it could have been painted by Sorolla, the bathing of a horse. He's an extremely sensitive painter. He has a sense of people and of color and texture. It's just beautiful. If you look at the number of colors there is in that sea, It is just incredible. A lesser known name is Nikolai Bogdanov Belsky. Yeah. Born in a small village in the Smolensk Governorate, studied icon painting at the Troitse Sergieva Lavra. Lavra is a monastery in 1883, and then painted modern painting at the Moscow School of Painting from 84-89. Went to the Imperial Academy of Art from 94 to 95, and then went to Paris, where he studied in private studios. Joined the Perevizhniki in 95, and then became a member of the Archipuingi. So that's the painter we saw before, the Ponte Greek, as they call him, that had formed that society. Because of what was happening in Russia, he relocated to Riga in 1914. And when the Russian Revolution happened and so on, he decided to move again and relocated to Berlin, where unfortunately he died in 45 as a result of an Allied bombing. And you're going to see he's one of these that really love to look at the poor peasants and the society. This is Sunday reading in a village school. And again, look at, these are all portraits. It's extraordinary because it's a quality of there is no one that is kind of a neutral face. They all are very discreet, very different, and very interesting face. All looking at that man who can read. And this is one even more distressing. Is at the school doors, and you have that poor kid, look at his clothes and his shoes, and he's kind of looking with envy at what's happening inside that classroom. And finally, I'm going to show again some images of Vereshchagin. He was not a Perevizhniki, but he was exhibited from time to time with their works. But he's very much his own man. So born in the Novgorod Governorate in Russia, so in the north, in 1850 was sent to Tsarskoye Selo to enter the Alexander Cadet Corps, entered the Sea Cadet Corps at St. Petersburg, and went on to Denmark, France, Egypt. In 61, studied drawing at the St. Petersburg Academy, and then went to Paris in 64, where he studied with Jean-Léon Gérôme. Traveled from 68 to 69 to Paris, St. Petersburg, Turkestan, did a big trip in Turkestan. In 74, did an extensive tour of the Himalayas, India, and Tibet. In 77 and 78, was a witness of the Russo-Turkish War. Exhibited in Munich, Paris, London, Berlin, Vienna, Dresden, until in Dresden, some of his paintings were banned because it showed a negative side to the militaries. And at that time, it wasn't well regarded, particularly in, Prussia and Germany. He went to Syria and Palestine in 1884, witnessed the Sino-Japanese War between 94 and 95, was in Manchuria during the Boxer Rebellion in 1900, and then really interesting, on the 13th of April 1904, he was on the Petropavlovsk ship that struck 2 mines while returning to Port Arthur and sank, taking with it most of the crew, including the Admiral Makarov and Vereshchagin. So you're going to see his paintings. They're very documentary in many ways. some as such a testimony of the horrors of war. So, but some, for example, this is when he goes into Turkestan and he shows the dervishes in festive outfits. And you see right away that his handling of the colors and the line, very beautiful, but very documentary things. And after that, we'll see a lot that has to do with battles. And this is a surprise attack that he painted in 1871. And there you see people that just didn't expect, on the people on the left are really taken aback by what's happening. And you can already see all the bodies falling. This is really that kind of in your face, happening in front of you type of battle. This is part of the Turkestan campaigns. He developed his thought about the cruelty of feudal lords and about the barbarity of battle orders, also about the heroism and the courage of Russian soldiers. One of his very known paintings is this one, showing the apotheosis of war, and shows that pyramid of skulls. He was residing in Munich when he painted these, and he was that was depicting his earlier traveling with the Imperial Russian army as it moved through Central Asia. So you have all the birds that are coming to clean the skulls. That's why they are so, but it's an image that should be shown more often, I think. Here's another interesting, this is also part of these scene that he saw, and what seems to be just an encounter in front of a mosque. In fact, is depicting what just happened is the killing of some people, and on each of these big heads of people that have been beheaded on the poles. So again, this is him depicting the brutal business of war. And what they also say is that what is interesting, though he was befriended by many generals, he never painted any of their portraits. These are some of the beautiful paintings that he did in the Uzbek, of the Uzbek population in Tashkent. And this is part of the Turkestan series that he did and that was bought by Tretyakov. Sometimes just a landscape showing the Taj Mahal. He's a multi-talented painter. He's incredible. This was, by the way, commissioned by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan. No, sorry, that's the Taj Mahal was, not the painting. Here's another of his combat and the war thing called the Winners, where you see winners, you know, they are undressing all the dead and taking all the good clothes that they can find, because that was precious. They would take the shoes, they would take the weapons and the clothes if they were okay.
Is that a decapitation? Or just he's kind of buried there? Bottom, middle.
Yeah, it looks like it. But they were with sabers and so on. So that was part of the battle. The road of war prisoners. This with, again, very expressive brushstroke. This is part of the horrors of the Russo-Turkish War. He witnessed thousands of Turkish prisoners freezing to death as they were marching towards the Russian war camps. Actually, at that time in Russia, a ban on exhibition of Vereshchagin's work was also enforced, as well as the ban on reproductions of them in books. The artist took these unjust accusations very badly and burned himself 3 of his paintings in protest. This one was very much resented, the forgotten, the idea that this was a body that was left as a prey to the birds. The generals hated that because it really was showing the army under a very bad image. So it was removed from some of the exhibition that he did.
And did he ever write about the decision to burn 3 of his paintings in protest?
He must have. But again, as I say, the problem is you can't find books and things that really of value. The few that are there are really kind of descriptions, you know, and so it's not worth it. This is a less cruel thing, but just showing a mounted warrior in Jaipur. And then he went to the Holy Land and shows the tomb of the kings in Jerusalem. He has a sense of grandeur that just shows that the people dwarfed by that big arch. And then one that was destroyed, but this time by the British, and that was showing the suppression of the Indian revolt by the English. What was controversial is the fact that he shows something that really happened, where that was a way to kill the leaders of the revolt by tying them in front of a cannon and then, and then just activate the cannon, and so they would be, you know, dismembered by that. But he showed them in later uniforms. And when he was told, you know, but this is not historically correct, he said, no, but they went on doing it. So that painting was toured Europe, but then finally it went to Britain and the United States. It was well received in the United States, but controversial with the British. And however they did, the British got hold of it and destroyed it. So what you see is an early picture of it, but it doesn't exist anymore. And then a late work that I know Mary likes a lot, this could defeated Requiem, that shows a figure of, you would say it's a Pope, but it's Christ that is there blessing that field of that people. It's just incredibly tough. He has the incense in his hand to bless all these people that died.
It looks like they're already becoming part of the landscape.
Yes, oh, very much. Now, I'm showing somebody who is not a Behedvishniki, but because we talked about Repin and we talked a little bit about Nikolai Fechin, I'm not showing Fechin, I made a whole talk, but an artist that I absolutely love, who is a little later, born in 1869, and I'm talking about Philip Maliavin. He was born in the large village of Kazanka in the Samara Governorate, went to, oh yeah, really interesting story. He loved icons and he lived in that little village, and there were monks going by sometimes the village with icons. And he loved it. And these were monks coming from Athos, the Mount Athos in Greece. And so he went to Athos to study icon painting. but was very disappointed to see that all they were doing is copying icons, but not making them really a new one. And so he became a novice in the monastery and started as a novice, was able to paint icons and murals. And one professor at the St. Petersburg Academy of Art went by the Mount Athos and had marveled at the works that he was doing. And so he convinced him to come with him to St. Petersburg, and in '94 was accepted in the Ilya Repin's class, which was quite a success. Traveled to Paris and literally in 1900 took France by storm. People loved his work. He moved with his family to Ryazan, which was a little quieter than St. Petersburg. And in 22, following the revolution, he finally settled with his family in Paris, toured Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, England, Sweden, London, and Nice. While touring in '39, he was in Belgium and he was made prisoner by the German there because he was thought to be a spy. And when he was liberated or fled, he wanted to go back from Belgium to Nice by foot and was probably helped, but by the time he arrived in Nice, he was exhausted and he died in 1940 in Nice with his family. Now be ready for color. The two Russian beauties. So he really introduced a new type of Russian peasant women that were proud, that were beautiful, dressed in their beautiful costumes. As you can imagine, red was his favorite color. But he did many of paintings. I'm not showing you many again, but the most known of his is this one that shows whirlwind. And in fact, look, you have faces there. These are all the costume of these peasant women. This is really became his chef-d'oeuvre, you know, the extraordinary work, because it's almost abstract when you see it. You really have to look for the faces. And so he made a whole series of these peasant girls with this beautiful costume and really that shine of red that really hits your brain. It's unbelievable. Towards the end, as I say, I'm not talking a lot about him because he's later. But then towards the end, he is going to change his style. And this is one of the later painting he did before the war, showing a self-portrait with wife and daughter. And again, you have his face just coming out, and then you have his wife, and then the little girl. But quite an amazing artist too. And he was the one with whom Nikolai Fechin studied most in St. Petersburg. So I hope you've had an idea of the realist painting in Russia. I think it's overwhelming. Next to that, we'll see the Barbizon, and it looks so tamed compared to what we saw. But again, we have to understand the context is very different, though France was in turmoil the whole 19th century, but nothing compared to what was happening in Russia with the poverty. So thank you so much for being there. And hope to see you on Tuesday. I'm giving a class on collaboration paintings in Antwerp in the 17th century.